Hello and welcome to CSTW's Writers Talk. I'm Doug Dangler. Author Terri Cheney has worked at several Los Angeles law firms dealing with intellectual property and entertainment litigation while living with bipolar disorder. And her life story was the basis for the book I just showed, MANIC. And thank you for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure. Now, MANIC is assembled as a series of vignettes.
Correct.
And how did you write it? How did you assemble the pieces?
Well, I originally began writing short pieces, each of which had something to do with bipolar disorder. And it wasn't until about 7 years that I realized I probably have a book here because I've been writing on the same theme for 7 years. Mm-hmm. So I then compiled it into a semi-coherent narrative.
Okay. But a narrative that you say at the beginning is intentionally disjointed because you want it to, it's not chronological, because you want it to approximate the experience.
I did want it to mirror the disease, which is not linear. I see the world in terms of mood, not in terms of chronology. So that made sense to me in my disjointed way of thinking. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, your memoir opens with a particularly powerful and disturbing incident of sexual assault, and I can't imagine how painful that would be to write about, but I think you did it as a form of therapy.
Well, it was surprisingly not painful to write about. Mm-hmm. It liberated me. It no longer owned me, the experience. I owned it once I put it down finally on the page. Mm-hmm. And that's the same is true of many of the incidents that I write about in MANIC. There's one particular jail story which was very shameful for me, and I've never had the same dreams or nightmares or traumas that I used to have since I've written it.
Okay. And I understand that you're a proponent of sort of therapeutic writing.
Absolutely.
And you work with kids and, well, with writing groups. And I'm interested in about your talking about your writing groups because we do these at the CSTW.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I belong to 2 writing groups. I wouldn't say I run them, but I do. I do run a group at UCLA's Neuropsychiatric Institute where I encourage people to tell their own stories. I think it's critical to recovery. But the writing groups that I'm in, I've been in off and on for 15 years, and I can't recommend them highly enough. I wouldn't personally have the discipline to churn out pages every week unless I had these writing groups that were waiting for my material.
Okay. What kind of writing do you encounter in the writing groups that you were talking about, the
Neuropsychiatric Institute? People just will show me their stories about their own experience with bipolar disorder. It's not a formalized setting.
Okay. Did you, when you were assembling the pieces, have a particular framework in mind for how you wanted the pieces to follow each other, or was that, you said semi-coherent, was that not a artistic choice, or?
That was a tortuous process is what I'd call it. That was working closely with my editor and my agent about how can we show some timeline here so that the reader doesn't feel too disjointed and can follow along. So, for example, I will refer to my father's death happens early in the book, and I will refer to that repeatedly throughout other stories so that you get a sense of when something took place. But I did want to have that visceral experience of manic depression, which is that you're never quite sure what's happening when.
Okay. I wondered, as I was reading it, there were a couple times when dates were mentioned, like 1994, and I kind of grabbed a hold of that, and I thought, well, if I could find the dates in the other stories, I'll know what they were, but it didn't seem to work out that way.
Maybe going back, I would insert more dates, but memory has always been a bit of a problem for me because I had electroshock therapy at one point in my treatment for depression, and it made things rather fuzzy for me, which is hard when you're writing a memoir. So it was difficult to pin things down. 1994 happens to stand out because that's when I had the electroshock therapy, so I remembered that. 1997 was my father's death, so I remembered that. But there are, the rest of it is a little bit fuzzy at times.
Okay. So how, as a writer, do you reconstruct all that? You talk to people? What's the process?
I went through old records, for example, jail records, unfortunately, and I talked to my family and to friends who knew me back when. And through these years of being in writing groups, I had many pieces from different times that I was able to pull together and rely on. So it was a a little bit like being a lawyer in a way. I pulled together a case.
It sounds like there are a couple movies that came to mind as I was reading this, like Memento, which is done backwards. I don't know if you've seen that
I've
one.
heard of it, yes.
And Pulp Fiction also does a thing where it's non-linear, and so both of those pieces came to mind, not because of the subject matter or anything. I don't that has nothing to do with it, but just the structural choices that were made.
Well, I think there's a place for nonlinear narrative. It definitely demands more of the reader. There's no question about that, and I have received some flack about organizing the book in this fashion. But again, when you have a disease where nothing happens A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it seemed false to me to structure it in any other way. And I particularly didn't want your standard memoir where, oh, I found out I have a disease, then I treated it, and then I got better. You know, that just, to me, that's boring, and that's not the way real life works.
Okay. Now, when you were going through law school, for example, how did, you said things don't work ABC for you? Law seems to me a particularly interesting choice because it seems very linear to me. You reconstruct events and you assign blame as often as it seems. So how did how did you deal with that?
Well, there is a period in manic depression. There are many different states in manic depression. There's not just mania and depression. There's a period called hypomania, where your mind is functioning at its best. It's really the best part of being bipolar. And you think very clearly, very logically, very coherently. Your judgment is still intact. You're very charismatic and productive. I spent a lot of time being hypomanic, and that was very fortunate for me because I was able to get things done and to think in the fashion that you needed to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, it would be then interrupted by bouts of mania where my thoughts would be completely scattered, and periods of depression when I would just be so paralyzed I couldn't think or move, period.
Okay. You mentioned having written a novel in Manic,
Yes.
A novel that it doesn't seem to have come out yet. Are you working on that?
I don't know what's going to happen with my novel. I think it was an experiment. I think my métier is really going to be memoir. I'm writing a childhood memoir right now. And I feel like a better writer when I stick closer to the truth, to my emotional truth. I feel like the words are more powerful, more compelling. I really have something I want to say that's tugging at me, that wants to get out. So I'm not so sure the fate of my novel.
Okay. So that's, and I often ask people, is there a type of writing that you, besides the one that you're an expert in, that you're interested in trying out? Like maybe if it's not fiction, it's something else. But often I often fall back on, is there a romance novel in the future, or a romance kind of novel in the future? Is there anything other genre that you'd like to try?
It's so funny. So many of my friends have said, well, first they started saying, when are you going to stop writing about being bipolar? Because it's all I write about. I will never stop writing about being bipolar because I am bipolar and it's the way I see the world. But I've had many suggestions about we should write about a bipolar detective, or write about a bipolar, a sort of James Grisham, literary thriller series with a bipolar lawyer. None of that appeals to me. I'd like to take a shot at some short stories because I really admire short story writers. It's a beautiful art form.
Okay. What other writers of memoir do you recommend or do you follow?
I'm not a big reader of memoir, actually. I was impressed with Kay Redfield Jamison's memoir, An Unquiet Mind, which was about her coming out of the closet as a bipolar professor of psychiatry at UCLA, which was very, very courageous at the time and had a big impact on me. So that would be one that definitely stirred me.